Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Eric Johnson with the OT Unleashed podcast. I'm so excited to talk to you guys today. I have my boy Brock Cook over there with us. What's up, Brock?
How you doing, man?
Hey, and this is my very first guest, and so I've been excited to be able to share it with the podcast that we're going to be doing. And Brock and I go way back, probably over 10 years of
Yeah,
kind
at
of.
least.
Yeah, and Brock's had me on his podcast a couple times, and one of the things that was really important for me as we were moving forward is that we have this conversation of why are we doing this podcast? I wanted to talk a little bit about generational relevancy. We've been in the social media game for a hot minute, and so that's something that I wanted to discuss. But Brock has always been such a great supporter of me, and I've loved being able to follow along with him and his podcast. And I know that he's hit a couple milestones that we're going to talk a little bit about today. But first things first, Brock, how's it going? What's going on? What's new to you? What's new for you? Let's get into it.
Oh, what's new? That's probably an embarrassingly boring question. Um, I don't know. Not a lot, man. Just working and doing my little extracurriculars, doing a bit of
Yeah,
photography.
yeah,
Obviously, still doing or trying to do the podcast when I can.
yeah.
Um, and this year, pretty much just because last year I kind of cooked myself a bit. So this year I've just been trying to look after myself a bit better and mostly stay,
Yeah.
I guess, mentally healthy for the most part.
Yeah, that's
So,
important. We've talked about this. We had actually
yeah.
a real good podcast. So we talked about mental health and some of the things that we've done to battle some of those depression things, and
Hmm.
that was a really good discussion. So I'll actually link that depression discussion on the Occupied podcast on this because I think it was really an important one. We talked about some of the tools that we use personally to kind of combat some of that stuff. So we'll get into that, but. So you mentioned photography. Now, this is something that probably within the last 2 to 3 years, you and I have kind of grown as photographers,
Yeah.
and it has become something that I've really enjoyed being able to follow your photography. And what's your photography Instagram and Facebook? You want to share that with us?
Yeah, it's just Keeper Photography,
Yeah,
KEEP number 3R,
yeah,
which is
okay.
a
And
little
I'll
bit
link that.
weird, but it works.
Um, And Brock and I, it's cool because when you look at photography in general, photography is really a kind of all capsulating life type thing. And so Brock's photography is very different than my
Mm.
photography. But we share this kind of passion for being able to occupy ourselves with that particular medium, and it's been great. And actually what's funny is I've stalked his photography, and we talked about getting Canon came out with this special camera called the R6, and we talked about it, and I was the first one to get it, and he had some jealousy, and then he got it, and then he started getting these other lenses. And man, it's been really cool to kind of follow your photography journey as well.
It's a deep rabbit hole once you start falling down it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, for, one of the things that we mentioned in the podcast about kind of combating that mental health, depression, and whatnot was, finding some of these things that fill you. And
Mm.
one of the things that I mentioned is, I have two takes on my battle of depression, and is completion and creativity. So completion being that, you get something done, you write an email that you've been meaning to write, or you um, you know, fix the fence that's needed to be fixed. Small tasks, right? Those things are great in the space
Mm.
that you're able to complete something and feel that there's some worth. And then the creativity side is something that feeds you. And for you and me, a big part of that is photography. It gives us a space to see the beauty of the world, the beauty of people, moments that we love and appreciate. And so I think that it's been really cool to kind of share that common thread. Of course, we're both occupational therapists. As of recently, we had been both professors,
Oh no,
and I have
big changes.
since walked away from that. But that's not to say that's not in my future. But so let's talk about that. So yeah, you're a professor. Tell us a little about what you like to teach. How long have you been at university? Where do you teach?
Yeah, so when did I leave clinical? 2016. Jeez, so it's been
Wow.
almost 9 years.
Yeah.
And went to the local university where I am, which is James Cook University in Townsville. Um, and I predominantly was there for. I worked my whole career prior to that in mental health. So it was predominantly there for the mental health content of the course, which suited me fine because that's my
Yeah.
jam. And yeah, that's the predominantly what I teach, but I also teach some communication stuff, which obviously with a podcast and interviewing lots and lots of people,
Yeah.
have a little bit of experience with that kind of stuff.
Just a
Um,
bit.
so yeah, so it's predominantly the mental health stuff throughout the course. So into all the different, it's an undergrad course, so we've got 4 years. So
Yeah.
yeah, teach into there's some mental health stuff in pretty much all of the years. So teach into all
Yeah.
of that, and some communication stuff in part of the year as well.
That's
So, but yeah, it's fun. And
yeah.
now I'm getting into a lot of odd sort of um, what would you call it? I guess the media and marketing side of the school because they've
Yeah.
found out that I can use a camera. So
Hey.
it's good because I'm actually getting to do sort of an outside passion at work as
Yeah.
well. So I get to do some video and photography and whatnot
That's great.
at the university as well.
Yeah. That's cool. And I think that was one of the things that I enjoyed about teaching is that there were other outlets that you could be a part of that was still within your scope of teaching. Um, I was the advisor for the gaming student organization, and it was really cool because it was my job, but it
Mm,
was also just
you could
like
talk games.
I could talk games. We held this game night. We called it CrewCon, the Crusader convention, and we held the first annual CrewCon last year. And it was cool because our provost came and played with the students, and it was just really cool experience to see, the leadership in the school also kind of take part in, the activities and stuff. So it was really cool. But I love those kind of little things that you can do as an academician. Yeah.
That's the other not weird but small connection between us as two is I've never been a gamer until I met you, and you
Yeah.
got me into it like a few years ago, and now it's like it's a big part of like I love it. Like I've gotten really into it, so I blame you for that.
Hey, you're welcome. You're welcome. It's funny because, yeah, it's funny because, in that gaming space, and this is another, thing that we talked about is I think there's this common misconception that gaming's just garbage and,
Hmm.
like it's bad, rots your brain. But, it really does, connect people across, the world. I mean, literally the world. You're 15 hours ahead of me, and we can have the same conversation.
Hmm.
At the same time, playing games, and I think it's really cool. And actually, recently there's been some kind of new game drops, new announcements that we'll be able to kind of chat back and forth about. Like, dude, this is so beautiful. This game is so
Hmm.
sweet, and it's pretty cool. It's been neat. I have a couple other friends that play Pokemon over in Australia, Pokemon Go, and they have like regional exclusives, and we do in the U.S. And so it's kind of cool to be able to collaborate through a video game across the world. Actually, recently, I had a chance to travel to London or to England to do a conference up there, and I met up with one of my friends, Kirsty, and she's been playing Pokemon Go like religiously for as long as I have,
Yep.
and we had never met in person. And back in November, like visiting, the UK, we finally got to connect and like play Pokemon together in a really
That's
cool
awesome.
space that that I don't think we would have had otherwise. So it's really cool. I love that gaming space, and of course, this podcast will probably talk quite a bit of gaming, as we go
Just looking
through.
at the
So
wall behind you, I would imagine so.
yeah, you got to pick your backgrounds, right? So
That's it.
all
That's
right,
it.
so one of the things that we talked about early on, so tell me how long you've been running your podcast.
So Occupied started in May 2018. So
Okay.
it's a little bit over 5 years now.
Yeah. Okay. So 5 years, and you hit a big landmark. What yesterday? A big milestone. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so podcasting an interesting kind of medium, creative medium. A lot of other, I guess, creative outlets. You kind of either see people in person or you can, get feedback directly. Uh, but with podcasting, it doesn't really. It's kind of one way traffic in a lot of ways. You don't get a lot of feedback unless people outside of the podcast itself, um, email you or contact you, but there's no sort of direct feedback within the contact the
Yeah.
podcasting.
Nobody's cheering for
Um,
you, or
yeah, pretty much. There's
like
no. It's not like a live
clapping.
YouTube,
Yeah.
or like there's no comments like on YouTube or anything like that.
Right.
It
Right.
kind of, you just make these things and you throw them out into the ether and hope that people will find them and listen to them.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, and then yesterday, I think it was yesterday, early yesterday morning, Occupied clicked over 500,000 downloads, which is,
It's incredible.
I mean, obviously for something like Joe Rogan, that's probably half a day, but for a little niche occupational therapy podcast, made by this weird Australian in his office, yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah. I
Like
think
I
it's
said,
it's
I think I
huge.
said in the episode, like 500,000 of anything is a lot.
Yeah, that's incredible, and congratulations. Like, it's been cool to watch your journey. And I mean, like, if you think about it, it's like 100,000 downloads a year, and
Hmm.
that's, I mean, if you break that down into days, that's, a lot every single day.
Yeah,
Like, if there's only what 365 in a year, so if you start kind of doing the math, thousands of people are, like listening, and
yeah,
that's
it's
great.
it's pretty nuts. But even then, I still find, like, to me it's hard to equate that to like people actually sitting down, taking the time and listening to you. And
Yeah.
it's really not been.
Yeah.
I've had a few experiences now where like people will come up to me at a conference and be like, "Hey, like I listened to your podcast," and I don't know. I'm kind of introverted and a little bit shy sometimes, and I'm like, I don't really know what to say to that, because it's like at that point, it's like there's a face to that, like those
Yeah.
numbers,
Yeah.
um, which is, but yeah, still, yeah, 500,000's pretty nuts.
Yeah. So you mentioned, I saw your post today about some of the numbers, and you mentioned that there was one technical glitch or something. Tell us about that one problem.
This is the challenge that I've thrown out to my listeners. So I've had one episode where it was, I'd say technical glitch. It was probably just my stuff up. Where, so when I record, it records to a little device. Looks like this. This is not
Okay.
mine. This is another one, but it looks like that. Like essentially outside my computer. But because I record on Zoom, Zoom also records some of the audio.
Hmm.
Um, and when I set up, I was recording with someone, and I won't say why, and I'll tell you why in a second. I was recording with someone, and I forgot to press record on my recorder, and the Zoom recording was set to pull from my webcam and not from my actual microphone. So
Oh,
my
geez.
guest sounded awesome, and I sounded like shit in the backup. So I went back and sort of, I was lucky in that I realized sort of about 20 minutes into this podcast, press record, and the rest of it was fine. But I was lucky for that first 20 minutes that the guest did a lot of the talking, so I didn't have to.
Hmm.
But I went through and re recorded my
What she
side
said.
in post. And I've challenged my listeners. I'm like, if you can tell me what episode it is, then I'll give you a prize or something.
I
But
love it.
no one's been able to tell, so I must have fixed it up pretty good.
Oh my gosh, that's good.
So that's
Do
my one technical stuff up.
maybe I can give your listeners a hint during this episode. So give us a year. What year should they be looking in?
Oh god, I'd have to look that up actually.
Let's say was it early on in your podcast recording, or
I
would you
think it
say
was after episode 100, but
okay?
I'll look that up and find out while we go.
Okay. And you're at what 160 something right now, 167 or
165, something like that. Yeah,
yeah,
there's
man,
a
it's
couple of
incredible.
them in there.
Yeah, that's incredible. I've really enjoyed. You have so much good content. The people that you have on have been a lot of fun to listen to. So tell us. So Occupied, what was your when you first started podcasting? So, I'm brand new to this. I'm going to be learning a lot. Probably
Hmm.
by a lot of failure, which is the best way. But what was your intention? Who did you want to talk to? What were the guests that you wanted on it?
Yeah. So the failure thing's interesting because I'm an over planner, so I had probably been like researching and looking into how to make a podcast for probably 2 years before I even started. And it
Sounds
was one of
about
those
right.
things where I was kind of like paralysis by analysis because I just was, and then I had a mate that just sort of kicked me in the butt and said, just start. So eventually I did. Um, but on terms of, I guess my original thought was one, and to me it was a creative outlet. It was a new skill to learn. Like I was
Yeah.
interested in learning the sort of, audio engineering side of it. I'm a gearhead, so I love like mics and toys, and I mean you can
Yeah.
see my camera cabinet behind me with all bits
Oh
and
yeah.
pieces in it. Like I like toys and I love tech. So this was like another excuse to go shopping in a way.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think over the years, and like similar to how we met, like over the years of being involved in the OT online space and then networking at conferences and doing presentations, all over the world, like I felt like I had this like pretty awesome network of OTs and some of the like who I would consider the most incredible OTs in the world. And I'm like, well, cool. Like, what do I do with this network? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
just gonna like gather all this information and just hoard it for myself.
Yeah.
Um, so part of me was like, I can. Podcasting was just sort of going through its first like big boom stage at that, like
Mhm.
about then. Um, so yeah, I kind of thought, well, I can start this. It sounds like fun. It's something I'd be interested in learning. At the time, I was like, oh, it won't take that much time. Um, fool me once. And I can share with the world some of the amazing OTs and not just the sort of big names, but like a lot of the like clinicians and smaller OTs that no one would ever have heard of otherwise,
Yeah.
with the world. And that was even through all of my online projects before that. That was partly what I've always wanted to do. Is I kind of had this thought early in my career that the only OTs that general clinicians ever get to see, or get to hear about are the ones that are willing to write and publish their work. And I'm like, but there's so much amazing. And I
Yeah.
learned this going to conferences and hearing presentations. I'm like, there's so many incredible things happening in the profession that
Yeah.
people aren't hearing about because they're either not going to the conferences or the people aren't writing papers about it. So
Yeah.
let's use an easy to access medium and try and spread the word about some incredible stuff that's happening in the profession that might not be strictly in that academic space.
Yeah.
So it was kind of that two pronged of I've got all these friends that I want to share their stories, and that kind of evolved as it started. It There was at one point I was in talks with another OT to because they were going to start a podcast that was um, essentially the purpose of it was going to be to try and interview some of the I guess key figures in the profession, essentially because they were retiring and sometimes they were passing away.
Yeah.
And their goal was to interview some of those people before that to try and essentially record their history. And then that podcast sort of never eventuated. So I kind of incorporated that into my, I guess, overall mission as well. So having a chat with some of the big names like Gail Whitefoot, like Liz Townsend, like
Oh
Charles
yeah.
Christensen, Michael Awama, that kind of stuff, for the purpose of not just educating, about their sort of academic knowledge, but also just getting their story. Like some of them
Yeah.
have the most incredible stories about being in the profession, but even getting into the profession back then.
Yeah.
So actually, sort of, I guess, recording that for prosperity's sake as well became a part of it.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool. Like I think about the same thing, and I think my favorite podcasts from the OT world kind of include these conversations with these, these pioneers, these people that have been
Mm,
around the block, and I've learned so much through like some of the subtle things because I think we see their scholarship work,
yeah, that's it.
and I think we see kind of what they've done, but at the end of the day, like who is this as a person? Who's this
Yeah.
human? How do they, take their day to day? Like, what is their, what do they love to do in life?
Mm,
And I think those are kind of when we get those stories out of it, like Michael Awama, we know him because the Kawa model, and the
mm,
Kawa model is this beautiful kind of mapped out way that we can look at OT and trend and your clients and everything. But who's Michael Awama?
mm.
And so to be able to kind of capture some of that and to really kind of get in the nitty gritty of people has been really cool. And like we said before, like we did that mental health podcast, and we're two pretty like well established OTs, and we're spilling our guts about the
Mm.
disaster that is our brains, and
Yeah,
and
pretty much.
I think there I think there's some you get some really good kind of meat out of that, being able to say like, hey, look, you know imposter syndrome, these people who are you know well established still have these same feelings as I do. I'm having burnout, these people that have been doing this for 20 years still have burnout. Like
Mm.
it puts a big kind of like, okay,
It
I'm
humanizes them.
okay, I'm doing everything okay, safety in
Yeah.
numbers. Yeah, that's
And
cool. So
that was the thing too, is like you see, because I remember like probably one of the, what I would say is the big names that I met first would have been Michael Obama. And he was, I think, because he was so different when I met him, he was like friendly and accessible and bubbly, and I'm like, oh, okay, this is way different to what I expected. Someone who writes textbooks to be, kind of thing.
yeah,
That I kind of went, well, he's like the next generation of. But then in talking with, like Gail or Liz or Nick Pollard, like those sorts of names, I'm like, they've got their names on textbooks, but they're people, and that's,
yeah,
I think that's part of the beauty of this medium, is that you get to learn the person and not just their work. Even if you have a whole conversation about their work, you still learn about that person just by
yeah,
listening to them. I think that's the
yeah.
beauty of long form content.
Well, it's also you get to hear like the brains behind the text, and you get it straight from the source. A
Mm,
good example that I always love. One of the the main activity analysis book that the kind of um, American Occupational Therapy Collective and the National Board of Certification they go to is the Heather Thomas activity analysis book. And Heather Thomas, what's funny is like I've been friends with her for a long time,
yeah.
and until I got into academia, I didn't realize like she wrote this book. This is her book. It's all her words, and so it was really cool. I probably should have her on at some point in time, but
Yeah,
it was
sure.
just really cool because again, you get to know the person, you get to learn the person a little bit more than the words that they threw down on paper. So transitioning a little bit. So one of the things that we talked about that I've been interested in something that um, I've wanted to talk about is this generational relevancy. So you and
Mm,
I
we're
are
old.
old, dare I say, old. But what's interesting is if you rewind 10 to 13 years, really social media was really just kind of taken off,
Mm,
and it wasn't as, I mean, Facebook and Twitter were basically your mediums. That's it.
mm.
And
That was all you had.
I remember doing some social media stuff with like Anita Hamilton,
Hmm.
another fellow Aussie, and and some other big kind of, at the time they didn't call them influencers, but we were influencers in the OT world back in the day. And I was the Army OT guy, and then we had like Miss Awesomeness, and we had Crystal Terrio, who was doing pediatric stuff. We had this really cool mix of, and I think Anita was tech. She did a lot of tech stuff. Um, but I remember having this like panel with these incredible OTs that were doing a lot of amazing stuff. And like in this space, I remember thinking, man, like I just am so like impressed by how well networked all these people are. And I was so excited to kind of see how they are, um, bringing this content to the world. I'm gonna.
That's it.
So I wanted to transition to talking about something that we kind of mentioned at one point in time is like, generational relevancy as far as OT goes. Like you and I are both older and we have been around the block for a hot minute, right?
Age advanced.
We're so wise. We're so wise, right?
Yes, sir.
And one of the things that I've seen more and more over the last probably 3 4 5 years is, with more and more social media kind of coming into play, there's a lot of OT influencers out there, right? There's a lot of young college students coming out of the gates, on fire, ready to do all the things, and so I started to like think about, I was like, I guess my time in the sun is over. I guess now I'm the older person going into the sunset, and maybe I'm not
Yeah.
relevant anymore, and I don't know how I feel about it. Part of me was, that's okay, and then part of me was like, yeah, but like I still feel like I have a lot I want to say, and so one of the things that I wanted to kind of ask you what your opinion was, like, what do you think about that? Like, so is there a point where as we get older we should step away, that are maybe we should be the ones being interviewed on podcasts instead of doing the podcast, or maybe we should be going over to TikTok, or do we look stupid on TikTok? Like, what is it that what's your take on all that?
Yeah, it's definitely something that I've been thinking about the last couple of years because obviously, like you said, we sort of came into that scene when OT was really just emerging onto social platforms. And like you said, it was pretty much just Twitter and Facebook back then. And then
Yeah.
even when Instagram rolled out, Instagram was that thing. Because I remember saying this in presentations, like, "Oh, there's no OT stuff on Instagram. Don't bother with that."
Right.
But that was before, obviously, Instagram had hashtags and had the ability to actually
Yeah.
curate
Yeah.
communities and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But so yeah, it was basically Facebook groups and Twitter feeds, and that was pretty much the extent of it. And back then there was kind of I would, even now I'd say a very small community of, I guess, early adopters who were driving that. It
Yeah.
For my take, it probably started with the ladies from OT for OT,
Yeah.
and then quite a few of us got on board and sort of expanded that topic breadth, I guess,
Yeah.
of what was available on social media. And it was social media back then was very much around just building a digital community to share resources, to ask questions, that kind of stuff. Kind of similar to what I guess the Facebook groups are today. But even though, even though you said like the influences and stuff now, don't. I still see that as different to what we were doing back then. Like I don't feel, maybe it's just my denial, but I don't feel like we were sort of that influencer thing because
Yeah.
even with like, so my projects back then digitally was like the mental health for OT group.
Yeah.
But for me, the push was at the start, my push was almost like to stay anonymous with it. Like I
Yeah.
just want to build this group. And yeah, I facilitated some conversations and stuff to get that group to be really active. But for the most part, it wasn't like I didn't want people like messaging me to ask questions and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. I didn't want to be the face of it, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
It did sort of gradually happen after that group got real big, and I was pretty much the only moderator for a while. So
Yeah.
obviously that um, isn't good for staying anonymous. um, but yeah, and I guess I kind of got. I've done a lot of presentations with Anita, with a heap of other people, um, around back. This is back then around the use of social media, and then that sort of merged into the safe use of social media because back then everyone was worried about should I have two profiles, one for OT and one for my personal and
Yeah,
that kind of stuff. And back then, to be fair, the privacy settings and that sort of stuff on social media was pretty much non-existent. So
yeah,
it was probably a very real thing. And then that kind of evolved to um, like using social media to develop CPD,
hmm,
and then those presentations. So I'm just like, I track it by the stuff I used to present
oh, I know,
about over the years. And now I have kind of taken like a step back,
yeah,
and I remember when I first started sort of pulling back a little bit, it was um, the thought was there that so I've TikTok, for example. I refuse to get TikTok, and it's not because I'm old. It's because I have a very addictive personality, and I know what that algorithm's like. And if
yes,
I get it, I'll never get off
yeah,
it. That and most of the content I can see on Instagram anyway, because people share it there as well. So
yeah.
I have no need to get it. Um,
It's interesting with TikTok. I do have that app. And I try to like manipulate the algorithm so it just shows me like beautiful food and photography,
yeah,
and it doesn't. It's like I'm
no,
trying to do this algorithm so that you feed me what I want, and it's like
yeah.
no, instead we're going to give you politics
It's like
and
we know better.
dancing, and it's like though I love dancing, I just want to see like people come up with great like cake creations,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
so it's so funny. It's like when you're trying to manipulate a social media, it's like we know that this isn't really what you want. We're going to give you what we think. So yeah, so it
yeah.
is interesting though. Like I remember there was a point at AOTA. I think I was kind of fresh back from Afghanistan, circa let's say 2010 or something like that, and we were just really, yeah, Twitter was massive. Like everybody, the OT conversation was on Twitter, everybody. And what was
Mm,
cool is that at the time, we weren't as globally connected as we are now. Social media really gave us this ability for
mm.
OTs across the spectrum or across the world to be connected. And that was one thing that was really cool because in that Twitter space, it was, hey, look, this is somebody from England, this one somebody from Australia, this one somebody from Japan, and like you were having these conversations. I would post something and I would get like hundreds of likes, and now Twitter is like a ghost town almost. It feels like I'll post something, I'll get a like, one singular,
Yeah.
and what's interesting though, Twitter has well, I guess it's X now. Do we just call it X?
I don't know. I
The
still haven't worked out how to refer to it anymore.
the social media site previously known as Twitter.
Formerly known as
Yeah.
Twitter.
It's interesting because in the gaming space, and we've talked about video games, but if you're in the accessible gaming space, Twitter is king. Like
Oh,
everybody in the gaming space is on Twitter, and that's how all these conversations go and start. And
that's pretty
um,
much all my Twitter algorithm throws at me now is gaming and rugby.
yeah, and so
That's
it's
which is fine.
yeah, you're
That's
like
where I
I'm
go
all
for
yeah,
that
I'm here for that.
information. I'm like,
But it was
but yeah, you're right.
but it's interesting, and I was surprised that that OT kind of took a turn because I actually feel like Twitter was like that first big space, and we had like Tweet Upset
Yeah,
conference, and then I think
yeah, yeah,
Facebook really started to do these groups, and you did the OT for mental health, or mental health for OT, and then we started
yep,
doing all the for OT things, and like you said, the
yep,
ladies doing the OT for OT, and then we had the OT for OT US,
yeah,
and
yeah,
we had all these different things. I've been on that, and those are crazy to do those OT for OT talks because it's drink from the fire hose trying to,
yeah.
have a conversation from hundreds of different
It's
people
pretty hectic.
feeding in. Um, but now it's almost like you were kind of saying before with podcasts, like you put your content out there and you do have people that comment and people that you can kind of judge by likes and follows and views, which is nice. But like I think my question for a lot of the followers of, or a lot of the influencers that are out there that have tens of thousands of followers on Instagram and whatnot, it's like what's the end game for you?
Yeah.
Like what are you hoping to get? Do you want to be monetized? Do you want to spread the OT message, and that's your main goal? I think for us, when we first started, the social media part was like, oh my gosh, we can actually hit somebody that doesn't
Mm.
know about OT. We can reach people that
Yeah, yeah.
maybe aren't connected to other OTs. I remember during Anita Hamilton and other group of us, we had done a social media um, panel at AOTA. I think probably 2011. But one of the things that we talked about is like, the neat thing about Twitter was that you could you know tweet something out and you could make somebody overnight. So if you wanted to be
Mm.
some big powerful entity in the autistic space, I could create you right now. So I had several
Mm.
thousand followers. The whole panel had, between the four of us, we probably had 20-30,000 followers on Twitter. And a lot of the OT space was there. And our professional bodies were retweeting our stuff all the time. And I was like, all right, so right now we're gonna make somebody huge. So raise your
Mm.
hand if you want to be an influencer in OT, or whatever we called it back then. You want to be a big deal in
Yeah.
OT? Oh, you right there in the audience, and we'd literally like, hey, come up here. And what do you want your username to be? And we'd literally say like, let's build somebody right here in this moment. And by the end of this session, you're gonna have thousands of followers based on the fact that we just retweeted you, and now your
Yeah.
message has been spread. So it was kind of cool to have that influence so like purposefully in that space, where
Yeah.
before that didn't
Yeah, for sure.
exist. And now it almost
No.
feels like whatever, people are going to find where they want, however they want. And how do you influence the next generation, or how do you influence the current generation? That's the question.
So I've been thinking about this a fair bit, and I feel like the big change um, was back in the day. Social medias didn't use algorithms.
Oh
They
yeah,
were
yeah,
chronologic. They were chronological feed. You saw the posts from the people that you actually followed or wanted to see. If you posted something, all of your followers would see it. So the game back then was create the best content you can, because people will follow you because they like your content,
yeah,
and they will continue to engage with your content. Whereas the game now is, how can I game the algorithm? Your content could be complete trash, but if you know how to game that algorithm, you'll start gaining traction.
yeah. And so you have to
Um,
do the stories and reels and
do the reels and all
hashtags
of
and
that stuff. But what that's created is, I guess I don't want to say a culture, but pretty much it is a culture where content is second and it's slave to the algorithm,
yeah,
as opposed to when we started where there was no algorithm. So it was content is king.
yeah,
And that
yeah,
was the saying back then. It was content is king,
yeah,
was what was touted around. Like, if you have good content, and I know plenty of people that had, like, one or two pieces of really incredible content that got a lot of traction because content is king.
yeah,
Whereas nowadays it's generally small form, frequently content
yeah.
is king, because
It's
that's what games the
consumption.
algorithm. And
Yeah,
you see the amount of that's the one thing one of the reasons why I don't want to go on TikTok. See, I can't even say it. Is this? It's literally just gaming an algorithm.
yeah,
I'm like, I've seen so much just utter trash
yeah,
put on there, but it's put on there in a format that the algorithm likes,
yeah,
so it pushes you to more people.
yeah,
Like, and I know Instagram's like trying to like tick every box, and it's like, oh, we gave you a chronological feed, but the algorithm is the thing that's still feeding that
yeah,
to like there's people that I follow that I don't see their posts when they post. I actually
yeah,
have to go and look
yeah,
because the algorithm's decided that that they don't want to, push out that person's post right now, or
Yeah.
only going to push it out to 5 or 10% of their followers and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. So the algorithm, and I know I sound like an old man. People will have heard me whinge about this before. The algorithm is what killed it for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And it's too bad, but that doesn't mean you don't keep trying, right? Keep throwing good
No, no,
stuff,
but I think
good
that's the
content
difference
there.
between the generations too. Is there's a generation of OTs now that don't know social media without an algorithm.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, like a lot of the biggest OT influencers that I've seen, and I follow some of them. I mean, they're popping things out
Mm.
at
Yeah,
least
yeah.
daily, if not a couple times a day, like, and it could be something small and quick and easy, like I just got home and had a snack,
Mm.
and here's a little dance to show my snack. And
yeah,
boom, and all of a sudden, like you get
yeah.
what you want. So it is interesting. Yeah, it's been really an interesting journey for social media to see where that goes. And I remember thinking the same thing. Instagram's not gonna. There's OT just doesn't exist on Instagram. It wasn't a
Yeah, yeah.
thing, and then it
I've
was.
promoted that at conferences.
Yeah, yeah,
I
exactly.
could think.
I
I
was
think
like,
it was like a state conference in like 2012 or something. I remember saying that on stage.
yeah,
And look at me now. It's probably where one of the bigger social communities is now.
yeah, yeah. But
Whoops.
anyway, so oh man, cool. Well, so I am new at some of this. I know that you have questions for me. You've been asking me some things, and I'm gonna
Yeah.
open the floor for you to maybe help me shed some light to what's next for OT Unleashed.
Yeah. So OT Unleashed is obviously like I guess as a name has been around for a little while.
Yeah,
Like you alluded to before, it used to be the Army OT guy before
yeah,
it became Eric Unleashed, and then it became OT Unleashed,
yeah,
and now the you're adding a podcast, uh, I guess, component to that branding.
yeah.
So I guess firstly, why a podcast? I mean, we've spoken about how you've been involved with social media, and you've got all these different platforms, but why this one?
That's a great question, and I I think the one reason I wanted to do a podcast is because I think there's one set of stories that haven't really been told in a
Okay.
way that I want to hear them. Um, and you have just talked about how you have had these great kind of brilliant OT minds on your podcast. You've been able to kind of pull some awesome information from these people that are writing the textbooks and that are, really paving the way for OT across the world. Um, but one thing that I have always said when I'm teaching, when I'm lecturing, is that I say that if you assume a body of knowledge that is unique or different, that it's almost your responsibility to share it with people. There's a lot of people that want to own their knowledge. Like, I am the one person that does this. Like, I only
Yep.
do video games and I just want to have it. I don't want to share it with anybody because if I do, somebody else will then have it.
Steal
But
your thunder.
yeah, and I don't want that. I think it's your job to share the information that you've gathered through your career. So for me, I wanted to do the podcast because I actually think that we can learn a lot more from the patient's perspective than from the OT's perspective. So, one of the
Yeah.
things that I really want to highlight in my podcast is having these very unique clients that I've had throughout my career and talk about their OT experience, but also like, what is life for you right now? I really want to dive into some of the challenges they have, the ways that they've accommodated for their injuries, and so I'm gonna have a double arm amputee with arm transplants that'll be on the show, and
Sick.
he'll be able to talk about, like, yeah, it's crazy. I was blown up, I lost my limbs, I used prosthetics, and then I got on a list to have new arms, and a young lady died, and now I have this young lady's arms on my marine residual limbs. And how is that? How was the therapy behind it? What did it look like? How long were you in OT? And
Yeah.
we're 10 years deep after your arm transplants. Do you regret it? Like, what does it feel like? Do you have sensation? How do you get around? Is there times where you wish you didn't have them? I'll have, there's a burn patient that I'm so excited about having on, who's an incredible kid. And I cannot wait to do a podcast with him. But he had horrific burns all over his body, and he's got an incredible story. And I've had him as a guest lecturer in my musculoskeletal conditions classes the last couple of years, and so I can't wait
Yep.
to have him on. But he's going to talk about life and what does it look like. He talks about his gender identity. He talks about how you know it, the burns have ripped away his masculinity, and he doesn't know what he feels like anymore, and like he doesn't know how to be intimate with somebody because of these things. And so those are the things that I really want to explore in the OT Unleashed podcast, because I think that I have a duty to the community to be able to tell these stories, or help people tell their
Yeah.
stories, and help them kind of get that message out, and really help OTs understand like what you're doing is good work. There's a lot of OTs that are going to talk about, this is what you should do. This is the OT practice framework. This is Moho. This is the Kawa model. And they're going to teach you all those things. But what I want you to learn
Yeah.
from me is that the residual effects of your efforts are beautiful. And let's talk about what those are. And so I really want to do that. And so I actually have kind of four tiers. The first is that, just with very specific, having my old clients on. I really wanted to do that as much as I can. The second thing that I
Yeah,
want
that's
to do
awesome.
is I want to have my OT faves. So like my favorites in OT. So you're one of you're in the category of my OT faves.
Oh,
And
thanks, man.
then I want to do a couple podcasts with just current OT students. Like, and I want to kind of do segments on, like, I want you to teach me something that I don't know. Like, tell me,
Yep.
I don't know everything. You've learned something in this last year or 2 years that's going to be news to me. So teach me something that I don't know. And we'll talk about, like, where do you want to be? What do you want to do? And things like that. So I want students to be on as well, and maybe even highlight their program or talk about the good things within their programs. And then the last one, the fourth one, is just going to be me going solo. And usually that's when I have that when I want to get on a soapbox and talk about an issue. And
My
so
favorite.
those are going to be fun. Um, so anyway, so those are the kind of four things. And that's the plan. I think that I want to put out a bunch of content. I'm going to try to do at least once a month. But we'll see what that looks like. I'm going to learn a lot, as I go, and we'll see how it
Yeah,
feels.
yeah. That's awesome, man. Like I know, like I've done a few episodes with persons with lived experience, mostly mental health stuff because that's
What you
what I
do, yeah.
know. And they're even now like they're probably the episodes where I learn the most.
Yeah.
Like learning off the people that we work with, or not even work with. Like I would listen to the episodes. Like I've never worked in physical rehab, but I'll listen to those episodes and I'll learn stuff because I think the client narrative is just so incredibly powerful. And I know it's sort of, I know it's been pushed a lot more in recent years in OT, but I still don't think it's been like given the props that it needs,
Yeah.
like on how valuable that client narrative is. Like we know that yeah, everyone gets pushed the buzzwords of oh, the client is the expert on themselves, but how many of you actually know what that actually
Yeah.
means and can like have experienced that in a clinical setting? Because it's massive.
Yeah.
So I'm super keen for that.
Yeah.
I'm very keen to have a listen to that.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited. I can't wait to record that kind of first one with one of my patients, clients, and see what it looks like. I think we're going to learn a lot. So I'm excited about that. So yeah, that's
You're
uh
going to
that's the
delve
plan.
back into the social media world to promote it all.
Yeah, and actually, that's a kind of good segue. I actually, um, I've always, you talked about this earlier, but like early on, there's this discussion of splitting your personal, social
Yeah.
medias with your professional social medias, and I've always been against it, only because I thought at the time, like, I am who I am, and so OT
Mm.
Unleashed, you're going to get everything. You're going to get my
Yep.
real life. You're going to get my conference life. You're going to get, everything. And so I wanted to just like keep that there. But more recently, I have decided that I do think that there is a place to have that professional existence. And this is, one thing that is going to go into the OT Unleash branding is I'm going to be doing a lot of public speaking. I'm going to be doing a lot of conferences. I've been asked, for the past couple of years to do a bunch of keynotes and different opportunities to go do some really good speaking. And so I think I'm going to lean into that a little bit more and be intentional
Yeah,
about it.
sweet.
So um, I want to take a platform of compassion, which is OT, but a platform of compassion and leadership to different audiences. And I think I want to take that OT love hug that we all have and take it
Yeah,
out to a different piece of the world that is going to need that more. And so we'll see. So we'll see where that takes us.
make a more curated feed highlighting that mission.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'm excited. I'm excited about that. But one way or another, we're going to kind of keep moving forward. I've been kind of working on creating my kind of professional existence, just in general,
Hmm.
my branding and everything. I think that one thing that was always hard when I was doing the 8 to 5 grind is that it was always hard to work on some of these pet projects, and
Yeah, yeah.
the deal. I mean, you're a podcaster and you've done this on the side all the time, and I've never
I
really
know,
been
but
able.
I don't have kids. I don't know how anyone else, like with big
Yeah.
families and that sort of stuff, could do
Yeah.
anything else.
Well, and maybe that's part of the conversation. A
Yeah.
couple of my students that I've had, we've talked about how we'd love to have a conversation and maybe even submit a proposal to some conferences about the occupation of parenting and how challenging it is and how it really compromises your ability to uh, realize maybe all the things you want, and
Mm.
very quickly you kind of see that there are some other priorities that come into play, so there'll be some good
Yeah,
stuff
for
there.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited too. And, we're going to be wrapping up here in a minute. Um, and I do want to take a minute to just thank you so much, Brock, for your influence on me, for giving me kind of a platform to speak on your podcast, and then really just being a great beacon of perseverance, not only through, pushing through your podcast. I mean, you're 5 years deep, 500,000 downloads. Um, but I know you've also struggled, like you're a real human, and and you've had real human things happen to you, and you've had to work through those, and I admire how you've handled yourself in those spaces. And so there's going to be a day I travel out there to, the motherland, and you're in Queensland area, right?
I am.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
we're gonna hit it up. We're gonna have a good time, and it's gonna be a good time, and we'll probably go do some photo shoots and you know tip a couple
guaranteed.
back. So anyway, but
Guaranteed.
all right, well, let's wrap up. Any last things that you want to leave here with? Any words of advice, suggestions, anything that
No, I think one of the probably the only thing I would say to people is, and it's something that I guess through this podcast now have this mindset of supporting people who are like supporting creators. And I'm not just saying like us, obviously. Like I've been on a bandwagon in the last few years of like finding other, like whether it's YouTube or other podcasts or streamers, people that you like or that you enjoy being part of their community. And it doesn't necessarily mean financially, like supporting them, but like share their work,
yeah,
get involved. So I think with a new podcast like yours, perfect opportunity to try that out. It does. I don't know. For me, anyway, it feels good being able to support people that I feel like I get a lot from.
yeah,
So like there's even certain OT podcasts. Like I've got some really good friends in this OT podcast space, and now you're part of our little niche club in the OT podcast world. But yeah, get out and support. Obviously, not everyone is wanting to make content, but pretty much everyone consumes content of some sort. So, if you find some creators, whether that be OT or otherwise, support the people that are entertaining or educating
Yeah.
you.
And the cool thing about the podcast space, and for OT especially, is there's always new students and they're always hungry
Yeah.
for something more. So, yeah.
And it's changing, like the world's changing. Like we just spoke about then, like social media since when we started to now, changing. The profession from when we started to now, changing.
Yeah.
What students, the expectations and the stresses and the things that are expected of students, changing.
Yeah.
So, like, podcasting is a good thing on terms of being out and like what you said before, of being able to keep, I guess, with your finger on the pulse with students, is a good thing to keep up to date with the current, I guess, world
Trends. Yeah.
that they're going into, so it stays relevant.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Brock Cook, one of my dear friends that we have spent almost no time together, but we have spent lots of hours together on these videos and podcasts. So thank you, my friend.
Definitely.
And
Absolute pleasure.
Until next week, we'll hit you guys up later. Peace out.
Latest.